So I remember back in 2015, bringing my team into the classroom and sitting them down and having our leadership coach teach them about leadership and culture, right? And we would do an activity, and the activity would be potentially some skill building, but it was more about just getting them to process the information we gave them. For instance, we might do a session on communication, right? And we might teach them, what does it mean to be great communicators? And then we would do an activity where they would have to be working on communicating in some activity to solve a problem. This is teaching and this is building skills. The problem with this approach is that it believes the solution for team communication comes down to skill building, right? And then just learning new ways to effectively communicate. If we teach them, how to communicate, then they'll be able to do it. But we know there are other barriers to effective team communication. There's trust, there's psychological safety, there's lack of role clarity, there's personal confidence, okay, that can get in the way. So today's guest is Zafer Achi. He was our last episode guest on the podcast, and he's a brilliant executive and team coach with 30 years experience in the corporate space. He works with some really big time people in the corporate space, just to say the least. He's also the co-author of a chapter on building great teams and Jennifer Garvey Berger's latest book, Changing the Job. It's actually the second edition of that book that he co-authored, one of my favorite chapters in the book. And that's why I reached out to Zafer. Now, he is not going to just share about the value of team building in this episode. He is going to give us 4 very specific activities that we can do, and they will help us to really take our team through something transformational, not just informational. So, like I said before, I've actually listened to this interview twice since the recording. I just learned so much. I've taken so much from it, and I know you're going to get a lot of value out of it. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerman. Betsy Butterick and Nate Sitterson sat this interview out. The mission of this podcast is to help you to become a better leader and build a better team culture. To get the notes to this in every episode of the podcast, all you need to do is subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. There's a link in the details of this episode, or you can also do that at tocculture.com and check out Betsy's Substack at Betsy Butterick. Yeah, so now I want to kind of unpack some of these 4 concepts you bring up in this chapter, which I thought were absolutely fantastic. We actually were very much inspired by some parts of the chapter within the book to record a separate episode that we did around trust, because I was like, oh man, trust has a whole new way of seeing trust. But you talk about in the chapter kind of 4 big things, which are trust, conflict, accountability, and failure. Like every team's going to have to deal with these types of things. Let's start with trust, right? Oftentimes everyone says we need to build trust within a team. That's so important. If you don't have trust, you can't have an effective team. Yet it's a lot more complex than when we oftentimes just say that, right? Trust is a lot more complex. Speak to us a little bit about, how complex it is and how important it is for us to understand how different people view trust so that we can actually build trust.
I think that's the fundamental ingredient is moving from a space where I reflexively define trust out of my own experience of trust, out of the way my own family thought about trust and taught me how to think about it, to a place where I realize that each one of us has their definition of trust coming from a different set of experiences. And each one of those is legitimate but different. That conversation rarely happens. We all say we want more trust in the team, but no one actually pays attention to what JP means versus what Zafer means versus what Rob means. And so one of the practices that I bring to the teams that I work with is this unpacking of our personal definitions of trust, so that walking out of that conversation, each one of them has a more spacious tolerance for others' ways of relating to trust, and understands that by taking a certain action that to them may feel benign, they may be actually walking into a landmine for someone else when it comes to their to the way they apprehend the question of trust. This new spaciousness and tolerance makes it much less likely that they will rub each other the wrong way all the time. and make it more likely that they will come to appreciate that, JP sees it a little differently. For him, it is more important for him to live in integrity with the values that matter to him, whereas for Zafer, it is much more important to experience someone else as being open and accepting. So in one case, for one of us, there's an element of sort of congruence and solidity and alignment. For the other, on the contrary, there's an element of openness and acceptance, for trust to be there. And because we have both widened and loosened our definition in a helpful way, we have both now acquired an appreciation for the imperfection of things, for the imperfection of our concepts and our values, which is helpful in the way we relate to each other. When I stop expecting from you black and white, I make it less likely that we will be in outright conflict, in you versus me conflict. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And to bring an example of my own into it, after I read that chapter, I was like, wow, reliability is really how I feel like I earn other people's trust, and how people break my trust or earn my trust. Like when you say you do something, you do it. And I had a conversation with a friend that had, somewhat tampered with my trust in that. And because I better understood that, actually, I think that this person really values openness and acceptance more, right? Like just ability to be vulnerable, have free flowing conversations. Is totally unaware that like, not following through on this commitment or that commitment really hurt trust, for me. And so it helped me to better actually see where my definition of trust was probably not fully complete or missing a few elements, and how other people I could learn from their perspective, their view of trust, and it wasn't that either of us was trying to not be trustworthy or not trust the other person. We just had very different views on how that was built and how it was broken.
Yeah. And in the language that we were using a moment earlier, in this example, you were subject to the notion that trust equal reliability, and your friend was subject to the notion that trust equal openness. And after that conversation, you both were holding these ideas as object, and therefore much more able to be fluid around them, as opposed to point fingers at each other. Yeah.
I love how you brought that right back to getting back on the balcony. I think that's a really great connection there. I'd also ask, when you start to talk about this, it makes me think a little bit about personality assessments, except this feels like it's much more rich, this type of conversation, like, hey, how do you earn trust, break trust, rather than, hey, we all go and take an assessment, which, and then we're going to sit down and tell you how you are and who you are and how you operate. Like, I don't know if you could speak to that real quick. If just, how is this type of work different than the traditional personality assessment?
That's a great question, and I will not do justice to it in my answer. We have to choose one personality assessment framework to be able for me to even start talking about this. But so let's take MBTI, which is the best known one. The MBTI orientations are mostly inborn, like you sort of come into the world with an orientation that is more this way than that way. And so understanding that you and I came in the world with you being more of an introvert and me being more of an extrovert is helpful. It already expands our ability to relate to each other. It improves it because we have those new distinctions and we appreciate them. Not dissimilar to reliability and openness as components of trust. The process of subject-object move is a constant process that happens throughout our life. and isn't limited to particular inclinations that we are born with. It touches on values that we've acquired, beliefs that we have developed, preferences that we have evolved over time, can all be cast in the subject-object move energy of development. It so happens that people who are specialists in personality types, particularly in MBTI, would tell you that over time they observe most adults move from quite contrasted profiles in the MBTI, like strongly E, strongly J, or whatever, to much more balanced profiles as they age. And as far as I can tell, but this is not scientific, this is my sort of way of bridging the two, it is a bunch of subject-object moves. It's the process of people growing developmentally that makes them more able to balance the poles of the MBTI framework. Each one of the dimensions is one end of a pole. But as you develop, as you grow, as you subject-object your way into your older version of yourself, you straddle those poles better, you balance them better.
A lot of our sports coaches, they use personality assessments, and to your point, it kind of they're very helpful. I've used them with teams, still occasionally you use them with teams, but there seems to be almost something in this that's almost in this type of work that you're doing with teams to be much more more of a growth, developmentally orientated around how we can adapt, grow, evolve as human beings. I want to move to the next one, which was conflict that you talk about, like conflict within teams. It's inevitable. It's always going to come up. When it comes to conflict, I imagine there's probably a little bit of like, some of this getting on the balcony type work that you've done with teams is really setting the stage so that when the conflict does come, that you're able to help people navigate the conflict. You're probably not being brought into massively, or maybe you are, like situations that have already blown up and then trying to like put the pieces back together. The work you do around subject object, is that to help so that when people do experience conflict, they know how to better handle that? Or talk to us a little bit about your work with teams in conflict.
Yeah, so I face both kinds of situations. Sometimes I brought in because a team is highly dysfunctional and they're hoping for someone to come and help them get out of their dysfunction. And sometimes I work with teams that are quite functional, but inevitably in our work together, they will run into some conflict and we will need to process it. My observations with teams is that in any organizational team, people are wearing two hats. They're wearing the hat of the function or the geography that they are leading, but they're also expected to wear the hat of the team, a leader of the totality of the thing. And for most teams, when they are talking about things that only touch on their collective hat, they tend to default too easily into agreeing with each other and patting each other on the back. And as soon as they talk about things that involve your hat versus my hat, budgets, objectives, then they tend to polarize. And the patterns of defaulting to easy agreement or fighting will tell you pretty much how sophisticated, how developed the team is. The more they swing between one end and the other, the more you know that there is development work to be done. The more they sort of live in the middle and they're able to toggle in the same conversation between different hats with agility, the more you know that this is a team that has attained quite a level of sophistication. So let's start with a team that is more black and white, that tends to oscillate between agreement and conflict. like easy agreement, facile agreement, and conflict. One of the practices that I bring to them is a practice that helps them appreciate that in every situation, for every question, there is actually a whole range of acceptable perspectives, a whole range of starting perspectives. So that if they collapse all those perspectives too quickly into agreement, or if they use those perspectives to fight with each other, they're actually not exploiting the richness that's available in the room. And the practice that I bring is, we call it double loop check-in. And it takes the following form. We ask a question, and we ask each one of them to jot down on a piece of paper their answer to that question. The question is usually something reflective, like, for example, what's the most interesting trend that you have picked up talking to clients last month? Everyone jots down a thing, and then we go around the room where every person shares their thing and listens back to the thing of others. So you say your thing, everyone is silent, listens. I say my thing, everyone is silent, listens. And at the end of the round, we say, okay, now no comments, disagreements, conversations, etc. We're just going to do a second loop. And in that second loop, we would like you to name the things that were in common. What were the common things that you heard here? And people will start saying, oh, I heard that, most people believe the commonality was the market is in a, hitting a volatile stage or whatever. And you hear 4 or 5 patterns of commonality. And what are the things that were outliers? What are things that you heard once or twice that seem to be different from those common patterns? And they name a few. And what are things that were absent, like you expected to hear, but you didn't hear? And so people name the absences as well. And with that, suddenly, all of the perspectives are on the table before any discussion has happened, before any decision has been taken. All of the perspectives are on the table and equally appreciated, valued, listened. So that whatever we're going to do next starts from this point of wholeness about what's present in the room, the perspectives present in the room, as opposed to, okay, the CFO has this perspective, has this recommendation on this topic. What do you guys, do we agree? Who has a different perspective? And the marketing guy goes in, and then they start fighting, and everyone else has lots to say, but no place to say it. And it ends up in either a fight or, everyone falling behind the CFO. So that's one of the richest practices that I use to bring in the diffuse and leverage differences.
Yeah, I love that, because it gives everyone a voice, and then it gives everyone opportunity to be heard, and know that they were heard, right? And that looping back. I can just imagine a sports coach doing this after, hey, we just lost 3 games in a row. What is everybody feeling is, been their reflection around what's led to these 3 losses? Or maybe standards are slipping in practices or trainings. It's like, okay, hey, what's everybody feeling about practice or training lately? And then maybe it's some players don't actually feel there's been a slip. It's such a phenomenal way to start by getting people, like you said, on the balcony once again here, so we can see what other people are seeing things this way. It's just not being stuck in their own way of thinking.
And there's another practice. If you're interested in continuing on conflict for a second, there's another practice that I find incredibly powerful. It's a little more. It's less accessible. It takes a little more maturity to be able to use it. It comes from this spiritual teacher in the early 20th century, guy called Gurdjieff. I don't know if that name is familiar. Anyway, Gurdjieff has been very influential in this space in the 20th century. And one of the ideas that he put forward is called the law of three. And the law of three asserts that there's always, in the way things move, there's always an affirming force, a propositional force, an initiative, a movement that will want to go in one direction. And inevitably, any affirming force will elicit resistance. So there's a denying force that arises that will say, no, this is not the way to go. We should go in a different way. So there is no force that goes unopposed forever. There's always a denying force that comes in the other direction. And that if we think of conflict as only the interplay between opposing and denying, we live in stuck systems, in systems that are either stuck in stasis or stuck in oscillating between two states. But there is a third force, which he calls the reconciling force, which is in a way, the possibility that transcends this opposition. What are all the possibilities that become available to us if we look at this opposition not as the end of the road, but as forcing us to transcend it, like at the possibilities that come from the paradox of this opposition. And in the law of three, the possibility of the reconciling force is always there, but it cannot manifest unless both sides are willing to surrender to the possibility of a greater good than A versus B. We use it a lot in our intentional community here in France to work through our disagreements. I use it with some clients with whom I've done a lot of work, but it's very, very powerful when it is embraced philosophically.
Is it similar to kind of like the win-win? Like let's look at this or is it more like, like here's a growth opportunity for us in this if we start to just shift our perspective here? Is it more the latter? Or
I love it. The win-win is sort of the cheapened day-to-day practical manifestation of this, but it is much more the latter, what you described as the opening of new possibilities. But the win-win is the practical implication that I can see day to day.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I mean, coaches in sports absolutely crave peer-to-peer accountability. And yet, no matter lecture of, hey, we got to be tougher on each other, we got to hold each other accountable, seems to really drive that. What actually helps to create a team where people will have some peer-to-peer accountability?
Accountability is one of those concepts that are present in every conversation, but that lend themselves to radically different definitions depending on who you talk to. At sort of the quite basic level, I remember in my 20s, for me, accountability was, give me a couple of metrics and I'm going to hit them. That's basic. And actually, a lot of the corporate language, a lot of the corporate systems we have are about metrics. Give me metrics, I'll hit them. As we grow a little, I know for myself in my mid-30s, I sort of said, well, metrics can lead to, can be misleading because I can hit my metrics and still not get the outcome that I want. And there seems to me that I am animated by a desire to create things, to shape things in such a way that what matters really is the outcome. Metrics are helpful pointers along the way, but they're not the end. The end is the outcome. And so I define accountability as meeting the outcome that you've set out to do. It gives me more flexibility. I can flex what I'm doing on this metric or that metric as long as I meet the entire outcome. That's another definition of accountability. And there's yet another definition of accountability, which I find to be much more suited to a world that is more complex, more unpredictable, where we have less control. It's the accountability to try things out and learn from them and continue trying and learn from them. It's like the cumulative effect of experimentation and learning. My accountability on the team is for us, and I will drive that myself, is for us to continuously try things out and learn from them and continuously try and learn from them. It's bigger than any particular outcome, and it has to do with the sort of the muscle building of the team. All three of those are legitimate definitions of accountability to which various people, depending on their development, what they're subject to, etc., will be drawn. And again, creating space for having those conversations and for the team to say, okay, in this instance, for this project, what matters are the metrics. And for this thing that we're going to do here, because it is so unpredictable, because it's so volatile, we're going to use the accountability as let's try and learn rather than the accountability around metrics or outcomes. And for this thing that we absolutely need to build for, our business to life, we're going to be focused on outcomes. Having that spaciousness around how we're going to talk about accountability avoids the snappy comment on the side. He speaks big, but he doesn't hit his numbers, and therefore, who takes him seriously? This kind of stuff can be so toxic in teams. Like pointing out what the other person doesn't do because it is what matters to you and what you do well.
It almost seems like the second type of accountability is more around curiosity, learning, giving feedback of, hey, what are we learning from these? And instead of like you said, like it's about a performance results driven. It's more about learning growth and how that feeds our performance.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think when we operate that mindset, then we come in with a lot more curiosity. Back to our, you mentioned it off air about Ted Lasso. A little bit of be curious, less judgmental in that aspect. So,
yeah. And it becomes playful. I mean, when you define accountability as we're going to try things out together with the best of intentions, and then we're going to learn from them and try again. It's playful. It's like everyone is engaged in something that serves everyone else. Whereas if you have your metrics and I have my metrics and they are in tension, we're much more likely to be at each other's throats. And sometimes that's the right way to think about it if things are simple enough. But for many things that are not simple enough, it's a destructive way to go about it. It's a fool yourself kind of way.
Yeah, I love that idea around being playful with it. All right, last area just to unpack with you is just failure. You mentioned that. I mean, sports are the arena of failure. I mean, majority of teams are not going away champions at the end of the day, and half the teams tend to be under 500. So, like when it comes to how do teams learn through failure, how do you approach that with teams that you work with?
I use the work of Amy Edmondson about the right kind of wrong. I don't know if you've come across that work. It's the primary framework that I introduce. Really worth, again, a future podcast. The idea is that there are certain failures or mistakes that are unforgivable. You knew what needed to be done. You knew how to do it. There was no excuse. You failed. You put lives in danger. Completely unexcusable. All the way to failures that are life-giving. Unless we try this thing and see if it works on animals, we're not going to be able to develop a new medicine, a new drug that will cure people. So failure is part of the thing. if you punish me for failing this test on animals, then there's something wrong in the way we're thinking about development. So there is no such thing as a mistake or a failure. There are actually a whole gradation of blameworthy all the way to praiseworthy mistake or failure. And introducing that language with teams is liberating, because they realize that a lot of stuff where they expend energy blaming each other or blaming others in the organization is actually good failures. They're the right kind of wrong. And many things that they are keeping under the blanket, not talking about, etc., are actually the right kind of, not the right kind, the wrong kind of failure, things that should be punished, but actually they're too small to be punished. So we forget them, and therefore we cultivate a culture of negligence, of where we oversee things. Yeah.
I love that. It's just, even it's a shift from everything being black and white. I think so often sports coaches do this, right? Which is, hey, I can accept those types of mistakes, but I can't accept those types of mistakes. And they have a very black and white of mistakes that we'll tolerate, mistakes they won't. And typically it's, well, they gave great effort, which is clearly a standard in itself. Like, what is great effort? What is acceptable effort that makes that standard good? Yeah. But like, we try to make it black and white, but it's a lot of gray in there. And just by like your example there, I think it opens up the possibility of us thinking about this in new ways as coaches, as leaders, and even within people within the team.
Yeah. I mean, in sports, I have a son who was quite a professional skier for a while, and I remember that his coach used to tell the team, was a university team, that unless they were falling often enough, they were not trying hard enough. So that failure was intrinsic to them becoming better at their sport.
Yeah. No, I had to even think just about my daughter's football training there last week. I mean, I was intentional in saying, hey, we're not making enough mistakes. I don't think we're going fast enough. We got to push ourselves. We got to stretch ourselves. Like if you're not making mistakes in this, or so it's almost failure is a success measure in those cases there, because it's the right kind of wrong, as you mentioned, Amy Edmondson's work, which I'm going to check that one out for sure. Zafer, this has been an incredibly fascinating conversation. I'll just kind of, before I ask just where people might reach out to you, just one more question for you, which is what's the most important part about this work for you that you get to do with teams today?
A sense of bringing joy into the life of people. I don't know if, you know the statistics better than me, but I think like 60% of people's lives happens at work. For most people in any role of management, 60 or 70% of that time is spent in meetings. And, most of those are meetings in some team context. And most of those experiences are miserable. So if I can contribute to bringing a little bit of improvement, a little bit of fluidity, a little bit of tolerance, of acceptance, of joy, of playfulness into those settings, then I've made the world a better place. And it certainly is the way I want my work life to be. And, if I can bring some of that to others, that's the most important thing.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think there's a lot that sports coaches can relate to that, of just, hey, we have an opportunity within the team that we're leading to create a positive experience that maybe leads to more joy. It's more life-giving for individuals, and cherry on top is transformative for people and their growth and development.
You're right.
Thank you so much, Zafer. Just for those that might be looking, hey, I need a coach, or we need someone to work with our team. And I know we have many collegiate and professional coaches that listen to this podcast. So just where might they reach out to you?
The best is my email at cultivatingleadership.com. That's goes straight into my inbox, and I won't miss them.
Okay, well, we'll put that in the details of this episode. Thanks so much, Zafer, for this interview.
Thank you so much, JP. I really enjoyed it.
All right, that's it for today's episode with Zafer. Huge thanks to him. You can find out more information about cultivating leadership and Zafer and the details of this episode and links to their book, Changing on the Job, Part 2, or second edition of that book with Jennifer Garvey Berger. They're honestly some of my favorite people in the leadership and culture space. I read everything that Cultivating Leadership puts out there. It's just actually really, really refreshing. Being so much in sports, I love to go outside of sports and just see how people are working on leadership and culture in other areas. Thank you again for listening into the podcast. If you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star review to support the podcast, and please share these episodes if you found them really, really valuable. Also, I think this is definitely one of those episodes that you're going to want the notes to. They're just brilliant, some of the activities that Zafer gave us. So you get those notes by subscribing to the Team Culture Toolbox at tocculture.com or the links to the details of this episode.